Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, meine Damen und Herren, panie и panowie. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here and to speak to such a qualified audience. And it's my second time at ENR's event, and I remember my memories about previous meeting are very positive. So I hope that we will go on with this beginning tradition and we'll be able to cooperate in many other instances. And today my topic is related to very complicated, to very complex issue, which is politics of memory in contemporary Europe. But generally, if I would not confine this just to Europe. I think that things which I would discuss today concern, these things are global. Now we have this use and misuse of memory and history throughout the globe, and this process, unfortunately, is intensifying for the last, let's say, 30 years. So I will talk about history and memory, but when I use the word history, I would speak about what we call affirmative history or didactical history. There is another term for this, which is mnemohistory, which is about hybrid of history and memory. Well, just students of memory would, from the very beginning, would start with the idea that history and memory are separate things. They are interconnected, sometimes quite intimately, but generally, at analytical level, we have to distinguish history writing, and memory. However, new kind of history emerges, and it existed for a long time, of course, which is mnemohistory, which in fact combines memory and history into one phenomena, which greatly influences a lot of spheres of human life, and first of all, the sphere of identity. In this country, we're in the capital of the country, which in, let's say, about 40 years ago was a turning point. There was huge discussion here in the end of 80s called Historikerstreit, the debate of historians. And that discussion teaches us how important history and this mix of history and memory is for political development and sometimes for the fates of the whole world. Germany made a choice in the end of 80s. Just the next event was a reunification of Germany. It's quite symbolic. So that time, Germans made their choice for constitutional nationalism and avoid the dangers of going to ethnocentric nationalism. So this is about the topic itself. Contemporary global mnemonic map represents three archetypes of memory narrative: antagonistic, cosmopolitan or transnational, and agonistic. The antagonistic narrative represents the past as a moral struggle between us and them, where the other turns into an alien that has to be defeated or destroyed. As a rule, the antagonistic narrative is based on ethnocentric version of history and memory, and more precisely, as I mentioned before, mnemohistory, or in any form of exclusive approach to the past. For example, decommunization in Ukraine and in many Eastern European countries, quite popular there, can also be characterized as antagonistic narrative in action. The cosmopolitan or transnational narrative appeals to the past based on universal values. And this is designed to overcome the conflict potential of the antagonistic memory narrative or mnemohistory. Examples of such a narrative are the pan-European standard of Holocaust remembrance as a shared responsibility and prevention of the repetition of such tragedies. or the idea of common European history, or, for instance, the most fresh example, the House of European History. The agonistic approach, the third one, allows for conflicts over the past. Within this framework, the other is not an alien to be defeated or destroyed, but rather as an other whose actions need to be understood and explained. To understand and explain does not mean to accept and justify. Studying the motives and preconditions of genocide does not mean justifying them. What do we observe in contemporary Europe? This is the trend, what we observe now, and I mentioned before globally. It is a kind of fait accompli. First, there is a new wave of revitalization of antagonistic narratives. The most striking examples are the revision of the Holocaust, the rise of anti-Semitism, and the intensification of contradictions between national and transnational narratives. And finally, the extreme instrumentalization of the past in the case of Russia's large-scale war against Ukraine. I see the latter, the war in Ukraine, as a European or even a global event. I believe this thesis requires no explanation. Second, to put it mildly, the moderate success of cosmopolitan or transnational memory projects. For example, I would call the expert evaluations of the results of pan-European projects, like active European remembrance, politically correct but not encouraging. When I just observed, I just calculated how much money were spent on this project, and then I observed a very good, very detailed report on implementation of this project. And then I found this report, this evaluation, politically correct and very nice in terms of project management. But I didn't find answers to the questions which, inevitably arise when we speak about this kind of great pan-European projects. I also have no data to evaluate the results of projects like the House of European History, which is also a grand project, which lasted, if we would start from 2007, when Mr. Pöttering just expressed the idea of this project, and to 2023, it's, quite a lot of time. And then there is dissertation on House of European History, but it's written by the person who was involved personally into this project. So, we probably need some kind of objective evaluation, and it's an ongoing process. So even the simple list of intellectual, cultural, organizational, and political challenges accompanying this project, the pan-European project, or its 15 years history, suggests that evaluating success and effectiveness here will be difficult. Thirdly, it is easy to see that the prospects of agonistic approach are hardly rosy. We are witnessing a clear hardening of antagonistic discourses in their large-scale invasion into analytical and scientific discourses. The increasing pressure of dominant political and ideological discourses impacts academic sphere. It's not difficult to observe this trend over the past decade. For example, left liberal, right conservative, and nationalist discourses, regardless of their ideological coloring, have the same simple goal: the imposition of a homogeneous dominant discourse that leaves no room for others. Scholars dealing with, for instance, for memory studies, who try to adhere to academic standards and disciplinary objectivity find themselves in a minefield when entering the realm of public interaction. If we would observe the European map, or probably the global map, we see that the memory concerns are rising and becoming a kind of core of certain political actions. Of course, I mentioned Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This is probably, not to say best, the worst example of instrumentalization of the past, and in this case, both by the victim of aggression and by the aggressor itself. And unfortunately, these memory wars, which unfolded in the middle of the 2000s, unfortunately, they became the part of bigger confrontation, where two sides consider itself as something which, at this moment, in 2023, both sides believe that their opponent should be destroyed altogether, completely. Ukrainians believe that Russia should stop to exist. Russians believe that Ukraine does not exist at all. They did not even believe that Ukrainians exist as a separate nation with its subjectivity. It's the worst case of instrumentalization of the past. And of course, in this case, when we want to try to find balance between aggressor and the victim, we should definitely be on the side of the victim, of course, which does not preclude us from analyzing the victim's actions. So, in the broader terms, what is going on with all this is the rise of what I can observe globally is the rise of the phenomena which I called mnemonic anxiety. It is a part of ontological anxiety or existential anxiety, which is exactly about the core, about the essence of the existence of big communities. Of course, memory is a constructed phenomena. Of course, memory is something which is engineered, but it corresponds to very intimate depths of human psyche. And when collectivities see a kind of danger to what they believe as a danger, to the core of their existence, to the memory, which is a part of identity, of course, we deal with the phenomena of existential anxiety, in this case, mnemonic anxiety. And, honestly speaking, observing all this process, analyzing them, I have no real answer has no real idea of solution of this. Observing yesterday's discussions, I just mentioned to myself that we're discussing. I remember these discussions in the end of 90s. I remember these discussions in the middle of 2000s. And now in 2023, I see the same discussions. Does it mean that we're going on a vicious circle? I don't think so. The major cure to this is to understand that what we're doing with this, with the memory studies, with the teaching history, with constructing memory, that it is an ongoing process which has no end. It will, that the simplest project in education is one person. It starts on the first grade and finishes at 11th or 12th. So we have millions of individual projects. And if we go to projects related to education, history, education, etc., it is ongoing, endless process. We have to start from the beginning, every 10, 15 years. So now going back to very practical things. I'm academic. I'm talking about theories, general approaches, basics, etc. But I also was involved in very practical things. In Ukraine, since 2005, I was a director of Ministerial Institute. I was a head of the group of experts analyzing the history textbooks. And quite recently, we analyzed history textbooks in several European countries and made a comparative analysis how Ukraine presented there. So, very practical things. So, we are all well aware of antagonistic narrative of the past. We're witnessing a rise of antagonistic narratives. We should do something with this. So we have tools. We have a lot of tools, trans-European, multinational, national, etc. So we have experienced various attempts to overcome the destructive potential of such a narrative. The first attempts dates back to 1920s, in the last century. Nevertheless, it seems to me that the experience has not been systematized and studied sufficiently, even though some examples of such studies exist. Consequently, there is a need for a more thorough and most importantly, systemic analysis of this experience. Such analysis should be practically oriented, not limited to purely academic sphere. Its results should be formalized as practical recommendations, brought to the attention of policymakers and various stakeholders, and popularized as much as possible. Where not, we have to move from this top-down approach when big institutions does something and then proposes to the public. We should probably go back to bottom-up approach. However, it's much more complicated and much more challenging than top-down one. So I just propose. Then there's a matter of practitioners how to do this. So it is necessary to ensure a more effective transfer of the results of scientific research and this kind of political research and expertise into the sphere of actual implementation. My own personal experience is that experts can produce excellent things and can produce excellent recommendations. And then they are either on the shelves or formalized and doesn't work, or work partially. So this is the great problem, the connection of expertise. We have a lot of great minds around. And unfortunately, these minds, in many cases, just wasted. And what they propose also. So it is necessary to systematically monitor the field, not only European, of the field of mnemopolitics, to timely detect and predict the growth of conflictual antagonistic narratives of the past. Mnemopolitics is the most sensitive indicator of possible problem. In 2013, we did a policy report, The Image of Ukraine in Russian Historical Politics. It was in 2013. It was commissioned by the I don't know how to translate it, Presidium of the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And one of our proposals was to give more attention in policy analysis to politics of memory in Russia, because it is heavily instrumentalized towards the instrumentalization of the Second World War or Great Patriotic War, and it is weaponized. That word was used there in this report, weaponized. And then the idea was that it might be used for aggressive war. Well, I would not mention what happened to this report. It was 2013, by the way, so nobody reacted. We just wasted some time and some money. So this analysis should be perpetual, should be ongoing, and it should contain the elements of proactive analysis and prediction. And here, the mnemopolitics should become a kind of core cells of analysis. Not just economy, not just political games, not just gas and oil, but something which is in the heads of those who make decisions. And, well, to a great extent, to understand why Russia attacked Ukraine, you can learn studying Russian textbooks. There is virtually no Ukraine there at all. Just sometimes the name appears in certain episodes, but generally no Ukraine at all. Just observe the European history textbooks, and then you will see where you will find the next zones of conflict. Finally, what I can say that I always like to recall the movie One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest. the central figure in this movie tried to lift a very heavy device and throw it through the window to get to the freedom, and he failed. And then they started to mock him. The people around him started to mock him, and then he said, "At least I have tried." So my final point is, let us at least try. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank. Es gibt jetzt noch die Möglichkeit, Herrn Kassianov Fragen zu stellen.
Thank you, Herr Kassianov. My name is Petra Weckel. I'm from Hamburg. And I've just a question of understanding. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this information that the text in the book, in your expertise, that the history is weaponized. I didn't catch it really good.
Yeah, generally, yes. It's well, that's a long story. Well, you know that in the beginning of the 20th century, the major idea of history courses in schools was to educate soldiers. You can go to German Historical Museum. When I taught here in Berlin, I brought students there and showed them this picture. That picture shows the guys in French school in France in 1870s, and the guy, the pupil, shows the map and he points to Alsace-Lotharing. So I have we have observed about 20 Russian textbooks. And the major line there, which alarmed us, the same, by the way, in Ukrainian textbooks, in many cases in Polish textbooks. I didn't find this in German textbooks. Well, not I, but one of our experts. But there are very different educational systems. In Poland and Ukraine, in Ukraine centralized, in Poland semi-centralized, in Russia centralized, etc. So the major point was there in how it was weaponized. It was the cult of violence, the cult of imperial violence, so-called extension. It was not called conquest, extension. So now Russia does extension to their historical lands. And the cult of violence and the cult of war, particularly Great Patriotic War, real cult. In 2015, I visited St. Petersburg for the conference. And then it was in May, it was 9th of May. And that was really impressive, how the cult of war and cult of so-called great victory, which cost Soviet Union 29 million lives and million lives in other countries. So how cult of victory was essentialized. You even can eat kasha and drink vodka there on the streets, just mimicking the certain practices of this time. And it started from the very beginning, from the very first years of education. So this is the way of weaponization of history. And of course, there is a lot of other ways of weaponization of history. When, for instance, certain historical actors would say that this history, which is next to us, generally it's between neighbors. It's wrong, and it should be defeated. First on the in the pages of textbooks, then in the fields, war fields.
Thank you very much. Vida Holka from Prague. I didn't exactly understand whether you studied also textbooks in, let's say, Western Europe or Central Europe. No, now with the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, you mentioned that the Russian textbooks somehow influence also the deeds of the Russian political elite at the moment. In Western Europe, and I think also I can speak for the Czech Republic, Ukraine has been in the textbooks, I think, always as a object. Listed as an object, not as a subject. So I was wondering whether, like, to what extent you think that perceiving Ukraine not as a subject but as an object of history is, to what extent it is prevalent also in the Western European textbooks and maybe also in general in the Western European and Central European history as a science, you know.
Thank you. It's a great question. It's just I just planning a big project of which named Emergence of Ukraine. It's exactly about how Ukraine emerged in the minds and in the consciousness of Europe in 20th century. Generally, this analysis of the textbooks of Great Britain, Germany, France, Poland, and Russia shows that there is a kind of proximity between Russian approach and approach in European countries. To a less extent for Poland. In Polish textbooks, Ukraine represented in many cases historically, and there is no problem to understand that Poles recognize Ukraine as a subject of history. For obvious reasons. Yeah, it was a part of Polish history, it is a neighboring history. There are different aspects and nuances there, but generally Polish textbooks, when you read Polish textbooks, well, Ukraine is there. Sometimes Ukrainians might not like it, but it's there. However, in all other countries, well, there is a lot of explanations to this. Well, different organization of the courses. In Ukraine, for instance, there is no so-called linear history. There are topics, certain topics, civilization, war, etc., etc. In Germany, it's a decentralized system, so it's up to textbooks authors to include it. But generally, this situation with textbooks reflects the general situation and perception of Ukraine. To a great extent, I must admit that it is not just because Western Europeans are so, let's say, passive in trying to understand Ukraine. To a great extent, Ukraine played in this certain role. There was no cultural diplomacy at all. In cases like when there was cultural diplomacy, it was very folklorish. So it was again about broader shirts, about hopak, about dancing, about food, etc. Very good for the beginning. But is it possible to explain that Ukraine is a part of European history? There is a lot of academic literature on that. Well, that's the challenge to Ukraine, to represent itself as a subject of history, as a sovereign actor of history. Only in this case, others would recognize Ukraine as a subject of history. Probably now we have at the turning point when Ukraine has a chances to promote this idea and to reestablish itself as a European country in terms of recognizing Ukraine as a subject of history. But you have identified the problem 100%. It is the problem in textbooks and respectively in policies, etc., etc.
Wir haben leider nur noch Zeit für 2 kurze Fragen. Sie können Herrn Kassianov aber gerne auch noch Fragen stellen in der Diskussionsrunde, die nach dem kommenden Panel stattfinden wird.
Thank you. Just one question, I'll try to keep it short. Are there any mutual common textbooks, let's say a Polish-Ukrainian textbook written by both sides together? Like, I'm from Austria, from Vienna, work in the education and memory field, and we had lots of conflicts also, like Carinthia with Slovenia. So we just started out with the 2 academies of science working on a common mutual history book of Austrian and Slovenian history altogether. And just recently we published a Czech-Austrian history book written by both sides together in a mutual effort. So would that be a way to go? We even had a platform in Austria in the, up till 2018 where Russian and Ukrainian historians met in Austria to discuss a common basis.
Thank you. I'm a member of Ukrainian-Austrian Commission of Historians, and I was a member of Ukrainian-Russian Commission of Historians, and I followed these debates with Russians. We should distinguish between academic historians and those who serve for affirmative history. And at the level of academic historians, among our Russian colleagues, there were no, doubts about subjectivity of Ukraine and the right of Ukraine for existence, etc., etc. However, they didn't have a voice in decision making or in influencing textbooks, etc. As to common history textbooks, I know that very well. The story of joint textbooks in France, Germany, and I'm not sure that it's a great success, honestly speaking. Because circulation, as far as I understand, the circulation is just in these border regions. And I don't know what is it, if you have evaluation of, because it's very fresh, so probably you will see how it would work. There were some talks about common history, common textbooks, Polish-Ukrainian textbook. But generally, no, there is no this textbook, and there is no talks now about this. But I must admit that Ukrainian-Polish Commission of Historians who worked on textbooks, that they did a good job, in fact. At a certain point, it turned into scientific tourism by the end of the existence of this commission. But generally, at the beginning, it was really important that people from both countries, good historians, met together and did their job. And it's influenced, by the way, it's influenced the content of the textbooks in both countries. The image of Poles in Ukrainian textbooks, improved, and the same can be said about Polish textbooks. So these works can give results. Unfortunately, the major question is sustainability. It's very highly dependent on political regimes and on, some kind of internal developments, because it's the field of state politics, of course. So at this moment, no textbook, common textbooks, and no talks about this.
Thank you. From Historians Without Borders, and you know our organization, having been at our meetings, and you know that we have managed twice to bring together Ukrainian and Russian historians in Helsinki before COVID and the war. But obviously this is not possible now. But what are the chances, and how should we try to keep the possibility in the future to have this kind of dialogue, because I think it is absolutely necessary, even if it is very difficult to arrange. I have some indications, both from the Ukrainian side and from the Russian side, mostly again Russians now in de facto exile, historians who see the need and the value for such dialogue. So what is your prospect for continuing this kind of work? Thank you.
It is possible. I mean, of course, it is absolutely impossible, and I don't even think about future dialogues with official historians in Russia. It's impossible, and, I don't feel that I would, propose this. It's, too many things happened in this year. However, I also do not support this idea of canceling Russian culture and canceling Russia. I mean, so-called, we have a kind of derogative term in Ukraine now, хорошие русские, good Russians. I don't think that it is a good idea to completely throw out all Russians, those who oppose Putin's regime. However, among those who oppose Putin's regime, there is also different people. And I think that, well, I personally know some Russian historians who left the country next day after the beginning of invasion. I know them personally. I keep contacts with them. And I think that these are people to whom we should speak, and those, even in very practical terms, we should keep them with us, not to deny them and to use them, once again, probably cynically, but to use them to undermine this regime. At least to show that there are some people who are not in compliance with what this regime does.